In January 2010, a skier vanished on the Montana slopes. By nightfall, rescue teams traced only a set of tracks that ended mid-snow. Family waited in a cabin, listening for updates that never came. The storm shut down searches, and officials marked him presumed lost. But 4 days later, a flicker of smoke was spotted beyond the grid, and one man was found clinging to life. In his hand, a notebook filled with jagged pencil marks. Every page told a record of cold, hunger, and waiting to be seen. What began as a presumed death became one of the most haunting survival comebacks ever logged. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from today. And if you want more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe. Snow came soft and steady over Big Sky, Montana. The kind of storm that blurred the horizon into white upon white. It was January 2010, a time when most skiers stayed to the groomed trails and watched the weather reports closely. At 9 a.m., the rental slip captured the moment plainly. Evan Keller, skis issued, return expected same day. His name in careful block letters, time-stamped by the clerk's machine, was the first trace of the day. Evan zipped his jacket tight and checked his gloves twice. He was 32, lean, the kind who trusted his body and the mountain. He carried only a small pack, a metal flask of water, a sandwich wrapped in wax paper, a pocket notebook, and a short wooden pencil worn smooth from years of use. That pencil stuck out from his coat pocket as he adjusted his goggles. He told the clerk he would be back by afternoon. Then he stepped into the cold, skis crunching on fresh snow. The mountain was wide and patient. Pines leaned under the weight of powder, branches sagging low. Families clustered on the lower runs, children tumbling, laughter muffled by scarves. Evan angled away toward a trail less marked, where the snow looked untouched. His breath streamed in quick bursts. The early hours passed easily, skis cutting sharp lines through soft white. The air was so clean it stung his lungs. By 11 a.m., the weather shifted. A ceiling of cloud slid in from the west, swallowing the sun. The open runs thinned of skiers. Wind pushed against his chest, whistling through the trees. Visibility dropped in a matter of minutes. Evan pressed further into the timberline, chasing the silence he loved about winter mountains. At 4 p.m., the lodge clerk began his closing routine, ticking off names on the checkout sheet. He noticed the line where Evan had signed in. No checkout time. He checked again, then again. The slot remained empty. At first it seemed like a mistake, maybe a late return. By 5 p.m., concern edged into certainty. He dialed the number listed on the rental form. The call rang through to the Keller family cabin. Mariah Keller answered. She had been making coffee, steam rising into the dim kitchen. Her father sat at the table, flipping through the same newspaper for the third time. When she heard the words, "Your brother hasn't returned," her hand froze around the mug. "Are you sure?" she asked once. Then again. The pause on the line was long, heavy. Her father looked up and saw her face drain of color. By 6 p.m., the first alert went out to local search and rescue. Trucks rolled out of garages, headlights splitting the snowfall. Gear was hauled into the back, shovels, probes, radios, thermal blankets. Volunteers signed their names to the roster sheet under a bright lamp. The air inside the shed smelled of diesel and damp rope. Radios crackled as coordinates were called in. At 7 p.m., the first sweepers started uphill. They moved in teams, snow crunching beneath boots. The grid system was marked on a whiteboard map, each square labeled with initials of the crew assigned. Cold bit through layers of clothing. One radio call came in at 7:45 p.m. Tracks located, leading upslope, terminated in drift. The static carried the words clearly. In the Keller cabin, Mariah repeated the phrase aloud. Terminated in drift. Their father sat back slowly, the muscles in his jaw tightening. On the counter lay Evan's other belongings. A wallet, a paperback novel, the keys to his truck. Ordinary objects, left behind like he had planned to return. The clock ticked past 8 p.m., each sound sharp in the quiet house. On the mountain, the searchlight swept across white emptiness. Only one thing showed his passage: ski grooves carved hours earlier, curving into a thicket and then vanishing under new snow. No broken pole, no scattered gear, no blood. Just the line of his presence ending mid-slope. Back at the SAR command post, a note was added beneath the map. Negative visual beyond track termination. It was logged at 8:15 p.m. On the whiteboard, red ink circled the area. Outside, wind pressed hard against the siding, rattling the window frames. The night deepened. Radios kept up their clipped language. Grid clear, returning base, no sign. The Keller cabin sat quiet in the valley. Mariah folded her arms tight, eyes fixed on the door as if waiting for it to open. Her father closed his eyes and pressed a hand over his brow. Every hour stretched, the silence between calls like a weight. The storm swallowed the mountain whole. Evan's name stayed on the rental slip, stamped at 9 a.m., a line without an ending. Only his ski tracks vanished into deep white silence. The next morning, the storm had eased, but the cold deepened. At dawn, the temperature read 10F, air so sharp it cracked wood. Search crews regrouped at the base, eyes heavy from the night. The whiteboard map was wiped clean and redrawn. New grids spreading outward from the slope where Evan's tracks had vanished. Radios buzzed as assignments were read out. North Ridge, Creekbed, Timberline Sweep. At the Keller cabin, Mariah pulled on her coat before sunrise. She stood outside, staring toward the mountains, her breath forming plumes. Her father stayed inside, sitting by the phone, hands folded on the table. They were told to wait for updates. Waiting stretched like a punishment. By 8 a.m., the first crews moved uphill again. Snow squeaked beneath boots. Shovels tapped at hard drifts. Dogs strained at leashes. At 10:45 a.m., a radio crackled from the ridge. Negative find, moving east. The words were written on the log sheet in black pen. Precise, final. Each square on the map ticked off. Searched, nothing. Evan was alive then, crouched beneath the cover of spruce branches. He had drifted off course the day before, drawn deeper by the storm until the trees closed around him. He built a shallow trench in the snow, carving with his skis, piling branches over the top. His fingers shook as he reached into his pocket. The notebook slid out, pencil following. On the first page he scrawled, Day 1, Lost Trail, Wind Rising. The pencil felt fragile in his hand. Its tip dulled quickly against the rough paper. He pressed harder, words breaking unevenly across the page. He tucked the notebook back inside his coat when the cold numbed his grip. Midday passed. The sun never broke through. From the valley, helicopters lifted off, blades thundering. Search teams scanned slopes from the air, but clouds pressed low and glare-off snow blinded the view. At 2 p.m., one pilot radioed, "No visual, circling back." Mariah listened to updates in the command post, a temporary trailer warmed by propane heaters. On the wall hung the map, colored with marks and arrows. She stared at the red circle around the timberline. A volunteer offered her coffee. She shook her head, eyes locked on the paper. Evan heard the helicopter faintly, a distant roar muffled by trees. He stood, waving, stumbling into an opening, but the canopy swallowed him. He collapsed back into the trench, pencil in hand, scrawling another line. Saw plane. No one saw me. By late afternoon, shadows stretched long across the valley. The crews checked out one by one, faces streaked with frost, voices clipped. The log sheet filled with negative find notations. Inside the trailer, silence pressed against the walls. At 6 p.m., the final radio call of the day came through. Returning base, no contact. The words were entered on the log. Mariah read them once, then again, as if repetition might alter their meaning. Her father closed his eyes in the cabin, the receiver resting on the table. Outside, the mountains held their silence. No tracks, no broken branches, no sight of movement, just white upon white. The radio log ended with one word, nothing. By the third day, unease had hardened into dread. The mountains glittered cruelly under a thin sun, ice crystals catching the light as if nothing had ever been lost there. Search crews were back before dawn, layering on gear, their boots scuffing across the frozen lot. The whiteboard map expanded again, grids spreading wider into canyons and draws that most skiers never touched. Mariah stood inside the trailer, clutching a styrofoam cup of coffee gone cold. She traced the red lines with her eyes, trying to picture where her brother might be. Volunteers came and went, their boots leaving melted tracks across the linoleum floor. Each time the door opened, wind swept in sharp and raw. Out on the ridge, Evan had woken stiff and disoriented. His makeshift trench had collapsed partly in the night, snow pressing against his side. His legs ached from cramping cold. He forced himself upright, brushing frost from his hood, and pulled out the notebook. His fingers were swollen and stiff, but he pressed the pencil against the page. Day 2. No sound. Fingers numb. The pencil dragged faintly, tip nearly gone dull. He wandered short distances, circling his shelter, searching for signs of a trail. Snow had fallen in the night, erasing what little path he had left. The silence pressed in on him. Even his breath seemed absorbed by the trees. He gathered branches clumsily, stacking them into a lean-to. At 2:15 p.m., one of the ground teams noted something unusual. A faint line of ski pole marks, shallow and broken, leading a short distance before disappearing under drift. A volunteer crouched, snapped a photo with a dated digital camera. The printout would later show the tracks blurring into nothing, time-stamped 2:15 p.m. The discovery was logged. Faint impressions, no continuation. Mariah stared at the photo when it was brought into the trailer. She pressed her palm against it, as if touching could bridge the gap. The volunteer explained how quickly snow covered everything. Within an hour, even those faint impressions were gone. Meanwhile, Evan sat back in his shelter, trying to carve shavings from a branch with his pocket knife. The blade slipped, nicking his glove. He stared at the small cut, realizing how easily worse could happen. He set the knife down and turned to the pencil. Its point had nearly flattened. He used the knife edge to whittle it, wood curling away in thin strips. The pencil grew shorter, but the graphite sharp enough to mark again. His second entry that day. Trying to keep moving. Snow took the trail. The letters wavered, cramped, pressed deep into the paper. By late afternoon, search dogs barked at drifts, handlers kneeling, pressing gloves into the snow. But nothing held. No scent, no trace. Reports came in, clipped and flat. Negative. In the cabin that night, Mariah sat with her father at the table. He held the same newspaper as before, its pages unmoved. The house smelled of wood smoke and boiled coffee. Outside, the sky burned with stars, sharp and indifferent. Back in the trailer, the photo of the faint tracks was tacked to the wall beneath the map. The image was blurred, indistinct, but it was the only sign of Evan since the first night. The photo showed prints that stopped mid-slope. The third night bled into a fourth morning. Temperatures plummeted. At 11 p.m., the official reading from the weather station logged -20 degrees Fahrenheit, a figure scribbled onto the search board in red. It was a number everyone understood. Survival beyond a night like that was rare. Crews huddled in the trailer, faces lit by lantern glow, the air heavy with exhaustion. In the Keller cabin, Mariah sat awake on the couch, blanket pulled around her shoulders. The phone lay silent on the table. Her father paced the floorboards, stopping often at the window as if he might see a figure coming down the road. The quiet pressed in until the tick of the clock grew unbearable. Evan spent that night in a hollow of snow he had carved with his skis. He slid into the cavity, pulling branches over the opening. Breath steamed in the darkness, freezing against the ceiling above him. His body shook violently, muscles clenching and releasing with no rhythm. He lit no fire. Wood was scarce, and wind would scatter the flames. Instead, he clutched his notebook close, pencil shaking in his grip. The words he scrawled were uneven, half-formed. Night too cold. Waiting light. Hands shaking. The graphite skipped across the page, lines faint, breaking. He pressed harder, leaving deep grooves, though the letters barely appeared. The pencil's wood smeared with resin as he tried to steady it against a branch. At dawn, SAR teams gathered again. Maps spread across tables, pens tapping, voices low. The log showed another line entered. Survivability reduced. The phrase sat stark among the others. Crews still pushed upward, following new routes into gullies and ridge breaks. Mid-morning, a team reported possible indentation near a tree line, snow-shaped as though someone had pressed down with skis. They marked it, photographed, but wind had already blown half the imprint away. By the time they returned with another unit, even that shallow depression was gone. Mariah visited the command trailer, her face pale from lack of sleep. She asked to see the latest logs. A volunteer showed her the sheet. She read the entry, finger tracing the phrase, "Survivability reduced." She didn't speak, but her jaw tightened. In the snow cave, Evan's breathing had slowed to a shallow rhythm. His fingers cramped as he tried to hold the pencil again. Sap from the spruce branches stuck to its surface, smearing onto his gloves. He pressed another note. Still here. Cold, worse than thought. The letters tilted, slanted downward, filling the corner of the page. He tucked the notebook into his coat and closed his eyes. By evening, crews returned down the mountain, shoulders hunched, eyes lowered. The whiteboard bore more checked grids, more cleared zones. The line of red ink marking his last known position remained circled, darker now from repeated tracing. Night fell once more. Temperatures dropped again, lower than the night before. The thermometer line sank deeper than anyone expected. The fourth day began with a brittle sky. The storm had cleared, leaving the air cruelly sharp. The mountains etched in stark relief. Search crews returned to the ridge early, tightening straps, pulling goggles down. The cold gnawed at exposed skin instantly. Helicopters were called in to sweep wider ground, blades chopping against the silence. At 9:20 a.m., a pilot circled the northern slope, scanning through haze. From the air, the landscape looked endless, white folding into white. His radio note came through steady. "No visual, circling back." The log entry was written in careful block letters. On the ground, Mariah stood with her father outside the command trailer, eyes lifted at the sound of rotors. Hope rose and fell with each pass. Neighbors gathered too, offering food, quiet words, but no comfort stayed long. Every glance at the mountain was a reminder of distance. Evan heard the helicopter first as a low vibration through snow. He scrambled from his hollow, stumbling across crusted drifts, arms waving overhead. Between trees, he caught a flicker of movement above. He shouted until his throat burned, but the canopy swallowed him. The machine turned, shrinking into the gray distance. Silence returned heavier than before. Breath ragged, he collapsed against a drift. His fingers sought the notebook again. The pencil, short and blunt, left uneven marks as he pressed. Saw plain. They did not see me. The letters cut shallow grooves. He closed the notebook and slipped it back inside his coat. By midday, search teams expanded grids toward creek beds. Dogs barked against the wind, handlers urging them on. Volunteers marked trees with bright ribbon, but each marker only led to another stretch of emptiness. In the Keller cabin, Mariah's father tacked posters to a corkboard. Evan's photo, dates, contact numbers. He pressed the pins so hard they bent. Mariah sat at the table, folding stacks of flyers. She carried them to town, posting them on windows, pinning them inside the diner, taping them to the gas station door. Her brother's smile looked out from paper that rippled in the wind. Up on the ridge, Evan tried to leave a sign. With the last strength in his arm, he dragged the pencil across the snow, carving a crude arrow pointing toward the valley. The graphite broke quickly, leaving only a shallow line. Snow drifted across within minutes, softening the edges until the mark became nothing. By evening, the cold settled deeper again. The command trailer buzzed with reports. Grids cleared, no contact, no evidence. The maps were thick with lines, but all of them ended blank. Volunteers rubbed their hands together, breath clouding inside the small space. Back in the hollow, Evan curled tight, clutching his pack. The pencil slipped from his grip and rolled across the snow, leaving a faint mark before it vanished beneath powder. The arrow melted back into drifting snow. By the fifth day, the mountain seemed to resist the search itself. A wall of gray rolled in from the west, wind whipping loose snow into spirals. Forecasts warned of a fast-moving front, and at 7 p.m., the official weather report logged gusts at 40 miles per hour. Radios relayed the notice. Crews were to scale back operations, return to base before nightfall. Inside the command trailer, the atmosphere thinned. Volunteers unrolled maps one more time, tracing lines already marked and erased. Mariah stood in the corner, lips pressed tight, listening as the lead coordinator spoke the words she dreaded. "Safety first. We can't lose more people out there." Her father stared at the floor, jaw set, saying nothing. Up on the ridge, Evan felt the storm long before its full arrival. The wind howled through the trees, stripping snow from branches and blasting it across the ground. His shallow trench no longer held. Snowflakes whirled inside, stinging his face. He staggered out, clutching his pack, eyes searching desperately for cover. He found a hollow beneath a leaning pine, its branches weighted low. Gathering sticks with trembling hands, he tried to spark a fire. Twice the match blew out instantly. On the third try, he cupped his palms close, shielding against the wind. A fragile flame caught on dry twigs, flaring just enough to glow. The light revealed the notebook in his lap. His gloves blackened with soot as he steadied the pencil. The words dragged across the page, letters smeared, hands numb. Still writing. Fire small. The pencil trembled near the flame, its wood too close. Smoke curled as the tip darkened. He yanked it away, a black scorch now running along one side. At the base camp, reports came in clipped and fast. "Visibility near zero. Team withdrawing." Radios hissed with static between calls. The whiteboard map grew crowded with erased marks, as if the mountain itself refused to be charted. In the Keller cabin, the windows rattled under gusts. Mariah sat on the floor by the fireplace, staring into flames that offered no comfort. Her father paced again, each turn of his boots across the wood floor echoing like a clock. Outside, snow whipped sideways across the valley road. Evan fed the fire slowly, stick by stick. Heat barely touched him, but the glow gave shape to his trembling hands. The pencil lay charred on one side, shorter than before, fragile as kindling itself. He pressed it once more against the page, graphite faint. But the act of writing tethered him to time. Still here. The storm roared on. In the trailer, the final log of the night was entered. Operation suspended. High wind risk. The pen stroke pressed hard into paper, nearly tearing it. Up on the mountain, flame flickered against the blackened pencil, smoke drifting upward into the storm. Flames licked the pencil, blackening its wood. The morning after the storm, the mountains stood eerily still. Snowfields gleamed in hard light, ridges sharp against a pale sky. Search crews returned to base camp stiff and silent, eyes avoiding one another. The board in the command trailer bore a new note added in block letters. Status review scheduled 3 p.m. The words carried more weight than anyone wanted to admit. Inside, Mariah sat in a folding chair, a paper cup in her hands. She had stopped drinking the coffee hours earlier. It had gone cold long before. Her father leaned in the corner, arms crossed, his silence heavier than anger. Volunteers came and went, bringing no news, only chatter of the weather. At 3 p.m. sharp, the coordinator gathered everyone around the table. His voice was even, though his eyes dropped often to the map. "We've pushed every grid. We've covered more ground than expected. With the cold last night." He stopped, cleared his throat, and finished with words clipped short. Status presumed deceased. Pens moved across the log sheet, signing names beneath the entry. Mariah's hand trembled as she watched the page pass from person to person. Her father refused to sign. Arms locked tight, jaw clenched. Yet the entry remained, stark and permanent. On paper, Evan's life was over. High above, Evan still walked. His body ached from days without rest, his stomach hollow. He had left his shelter behind, moving downslope in blind determination. Snowfields opened into gullies, each path identical. His breath came shallow, frost crusting his scarf. He stumbled often, each fall harder to rise from. At one slope he slipped, skis tangling. He crashed into a drift, his chest slamming against ice. When he pushed himself up, he felt something snap faintly in his coat pocket. He pulled the pencil free, broken in two, graphite exposed like a wound. He held both halves in his palm, staring as if the break marked something greater. Still, he pressed the jagged end against the notebook, his hand cramped, letters shaking. Keep moving. Back in town, the family prepared a vigil. Flyers were left on counters, candles arranged near the church steps. People gathered in small knots, voices hushed, some speaking of closure, others of miracles. Mariah walked through them like a shadow, her brother's photograph pressed to her chest. In the command trailer, the signed log lay open under the lamp. The words, "presumed deceased," glared underlined. The pencil used to write it rolled slowly across the table, stopping against the map. Up on the ridge, Evan clutched his broken pencil, forcing himself to stand again. Snow swirled in eddies around his knees, every step an act of defiance against silence. On paper, his life was already over. By the 6th day, the mountain carried an almost funereal quiet. Search operations had shifted tone, less urgency, more routine sweeps, more paperwork. Volunteers still arrived, but their eyes betrayed doubt. The command trailer smelled of damp coats and stale coffee. The whiteboard map was dense with lines, so crowded it was hard to see open space. In red marker at the bottom, someone had written almost reluctantly, "Transition to recovery." Mariah stared at the word for a long time. Her father had stopped coming to the post altogether, retreating into silence in the cabin. She stayed, watching every log entry, gripping hope even as official language erased it. Evan stumbled through timber that morning, breath rattling, legs refusing steady rhythm. Snow hid crevices, and when he stepped forward, the crust gave way. He dropped into a shallow hole, a small crevasse hidden under powder. The fall jarred him, knocking the wind from his chest. He cried out, the sound swallowed instantly by white walls. For minutes he lay stunned, snow pressed against his side. Pain throbbed in his thigh where he had struck rock beneath the crust. He pulled himself up, leaning against the icy wall. Fingers searched his pocket and found the notebook, damp but intact. The pencil stub rattled inside, already broken from the fall. He managed to grip the larger half, pressing it to paper, fell, leg hurts, still alive. Blood from a scrape on his thigh seeped through his pants. Later, EMS notes would list abrasion left leg in neat handwriting. A minor wound that in such conditions could have meant infection. Worse. For now, Evan tore a strip from his shirt, wrapping it tightly, nodding with shaking hands. Above, no one knew he had fallen. The slope looked unbroken from the air. Helicopters had been grounded again due to gusts, leaving only ground teams pushing further into drifted gullies. Their dogs barked at empty snow, handlers marking coordinates with fluorescent tape before moving on. At the cabin, neighbors gathered with casseroles, awkwardly filling silence. Mariah thanked them, but barely tasted food. In her lap, she held a copy of the poster, edges worn from folding. She whispered her brother's name once, as if saying it aloud might carry across miles of snow. In the crevasse, Evan hunched low, clutching the stub of pencil. It had shrunk to barely more than an inch. He carved another shaky line into the notebook margin. The graphite crumbled, smudging across the page. He closed the cover and pressed it to his chest, eyes shut. Up on the whiteboard map, more grids were crossed off in thick black strokes. Volunteers packed gear with slow movements. The language in the logs grew colder, clear, negative, no contact. Snow fell lightly that evening, covering old tracks, sealing over the shallow hole where Evan lay hidden. His firewood was nearly gone. The pencil was now no longer than a child's finger. The journal line broke off mid-word. The 7th day began under a weak sun. light reflecting harshly across the slopes. Official crews had already pulled back their resources, focusing on administrative closeout, but volunteers remained. Some were neighbors, others skiers who couldn't stand leaving the story unfinished. They gathered at the edge of the timberline, radios borrowed, maps copied by hand. Their coordinator, a retired ranger, pointed toward areas outside the official grid. "We'll sweep here, past the ridge." Mariah stood with them. Her father had stayed in the cabin, unwilling to relive another empty day, but she pressed forward. She carried a thermos of coffee for the group, her eyes fixed on the tree line, as if she might see her brother walk out. By midday, the volunteer team pushed into the unofficial sector. Snow crunched in rhythm beneath boots. The air was still, deceptively calm after days of storms. Then, at 1:12 p.m., a faint trail of smoke curled upward between trees. One man pointed, voice tight. "There, check that." Radios hissed with static as he called it in. "Possible survivor sighted." The words marked in the log carried an electricity no one had felt in days. They moved quickly, climbing the ridge, breaking through crusted snow. In a hollow beneath a cluster of spruce, they found him. Evan sat slumped, eyes half shut, lips cracked and gray. His coat was stiff with frost. In his lap, the notebook lay open, pencil stub clutched loosely in one swollen hand. He looked up weakly at the sound of boots approaching. His first word rasped, nearly lost to wind. "Help!" The volunteers rushed to him, pulling blankets from packs, checking for pulse, breath, consciousness. His skin was waxy, his movements slow, but life still held. One man pressed the radio hard against his mouth, shouting through static, "Confirmed! Alive! Repeat! Alive!" Back in the valley, Mariah sat in the command trailer, staring at the radio console. When the words broke through, "Alive," she gasped, covering her mouth. Her father, who had just arrived after days away, gripped the edge of the table so tightly his knuckles whitened. No one in the trailer moved for a moment. The room filled only with the echo of the word. Up on the ridge, the volunteers lifted Evan carefully onto a sled improvised from skis and rope. The notebook slid from his lap, the pencil tumbling out. One of the men scooped them up, tucking them into a jacket pocket, knowing instinctively they mattered. The trek down was slow, careful. Every few steps they checked his breathing. He whispered fragments. Cold, plain, days. His voice cracked, but the sound itself was proof against the silence that had nearly erased him. At 2:30 p.m., official EMS teams intercepted the volunteers, wrapping Evan in foil blankets, sliding an oxygen mask across his face. His pulse was weak but steady. The radio kept repeating the word that no one expected to hear, "Alive." The radio crackled with a single word, "Alive." The sled reached the valley by late afternoon. Search and rescue medics took over immediately, gloves moving fast, voices crisp with urgency. Evan's body was limp, breath shallow, eyes blinking without focus. The log from EMS recorded his core temperature at 86 F, a number marked in red that spoke of severe hypothermia. They wrapped him in layers of foil blankets, hot packs pressed against his chest and underarms. Mariah was waiting when they rolled him into the cabin-turned-clinic. She froze at the sight, her brother pale, lips cracked, eyelids fluttering. His hand still clutched the notebook, knuckles stiff, the stub of pencil slipping loose. A medic reached to remove it, but Evan's fingers resisted, locked even in weakness. It took careful coaxing before the items were placed on a steel tray beside the bed. The room filled with the noise of rescue, the hiss of oxygen tanks, the click of thermometers, the quick notes scribbled onto intake sheets. A nurse checked his eyes with a penlight, voice steady. Responsive, minimal. Another logged pulse and respiration, writing across lined paper in neat blue ink. Mariah stood at the head of the cot, speaking his name softly, again and again. For a moment, his eyes flicked toward her. His lips moved without sound, but she knew the recognition was real. She pressed her hand against his wrist, feeling the faint beat beneath. Outside, word had already spread. Neighbors gathered near the trailer, whispering in clusters, watching as supplies were carried in. The story moved quickly through town. The skier was alive. Hours earlier, candles had been lit in his memory. Now people spoke of miracles, shaking their heads in disbelief. In the cramped clinic, heat built up from propane heaters. The air smelled of sweat, wool, antiseptic. Medics peeled away layers of ice-crusted clothing, laying garments across chairs to thaw. They examined his thigh wound, noting abrasion and swelling, logging it without drama. Non-life-threatening. The phrase was circled, underscored. The notebook remained on the steel tray, its cover damp, pages warped. The pencil, blackened along one side and broken in two, lay beside it. One medic paused to look at it, shaking his head before returning to his work. Evan stirred once, mumbling incoherent words. His sister leaned close, catching only fragments. Plain, writing, cold. She smoothed his hair, whispering back that he was safe. For the first time in days, she felt warmth that wasn't from fire or heaters. Night settled outside the cabin. Snow had stopped, stars hard against the sky. The town seemed to hold its breath, the mountain looming silent above. Inside, monitors beeped faintly, logging each fragile heartbeat. The pencil and notebook glinted under lamplight, evidence of endurance and proof of survival. The pencil rested beside an IV drip bag. Morning broke quiet over the valley. The storm had cleared, leaving the air brittle, sky washed pale. In the makeshift clinic, Evan stirred against the cot, his body heavy but his eyes open. Medics noted the change, scribbling in blue ink across his chart. Conscious, verbal. He looked around slowly, as if orienting himself to a world he had almost left. Mariah leaned close, her hand wrapped around his, warmer now than the night before. "You're here," she whispered. Evan's lips formed the smallest smile. His throat was raw, words rasping, but he managed to speak. Still alive. Reporters arrived by mid-morning, word spreading fast beyond town. They clustered near the trailer, cameras glinting in sun, though SAR officers kept them at a distance. The official press release framed it simply: rescue successful, survivor stable condition. But among neighbors, the story carried sharper edges of how close it had come to ending, of the journals that told what no one else had seen. The notebook was opened at last. Pages were damp, the ink blurred from melted snow, but the graphite entries remained. Short lines, clipped phrases. Day 1, lost trail, wind rising. Day 2, no sound, fingers numb. Day 4, saw plane, they did not see me. Each page grew shakier, letters slanting, some words breaking mid-stroke. The copies were made immediately, stacked in neat folders stamped with dates. The originals, still fragile, were sealed in protective sleeves. Photocopies entered the SAR archive, each page tagged with a time of accession. Volunteers leafed through them with reverence, whispering as if reading testimony from the edge of silence. Mariah kept the originals, tucked into a weatherproof pouch handed to her with formality. She pressed the bundle to her chest, refusing to let it go. Her father stood behind her, silent. But when he touched the pouch, his hand lingered, trembling against the plastic cover. Evan spoke haltingly to an interviewer days later, sitting in a wheelchair, blanket across his lap. "I wrote because it was the only thing I could do. Each line meant I was still here. If they found me or not, someone would read it." His voice cracked, but his eyes held steady. The pencil, broken and scorched, sat on the table beside him, sealed in nylon with an evidence tag. The world framed him as a miracle, a man returned from snow. But in his own words, survival was less about miracle than persistence. Every mark with that pencil was proof I hadn't gone yet. In the command trailer, the photocopied pages rested in a binder labeled in block letters. Keller Search, January 2010. Officers flipped through them like any other file, yet the words carried weight beyond protocol. They were not just records. They were the breath of a man pulled back from silence. The pencil remained sealed, tagged with date and case number. lying against stainless steel like a relic. The evidence tag read simply, "Pencil, recovered survivor." Years later, the mountain looked unchanged. White ridges stacked against the sky, slopes filled with weekend skiers who never knew what had been nearly lost there. In town, the search and rescue office kept a small display case near the entrance. Inside, under glass, lay two objects: a weathered notebook and a broken pencil, wood blackened on one side. The placard beneath them read, "Recovered January 2010. Evan lived quietly after the rescue. He returned to work, to family gatherings, to the routines of life that once seemed unreachable." Interviews came and went, headlines faded, but he carried the weight of those days in silence. When asked, he offered simple sentences. "It was cold. I kept writing. They found me." The rest stayed inside the pages of the notebook that no one else touched. Mariah visited the SAR office often. She would pause before the glass case, fingertips hovering just above it. The pencil inside was shorter than she remembered, worn almost to nothing, but the sight of it stilled her. Volunteers still called her family's story the miracle, though she thought of it differently. To her, it was proof of endurance, proof of a brother who had refused to be erased. The official files told the story clinically. Timestamps of searches, log entries of negative finds, weather reports, intake sheets. Between them, the journal pages had been copied and archived, each line preserved in cold black toner. Yet the originals remained in their fragile form, graphite fading slowly, fibers warped by snowmelt. Every stroke still visible was a defiance against silence. Evan walked past the display only once. He lingered a moment, eyes on the glass. For a breath, his reflection overlapped the objects, as if he were part of the case himself. He smiled faintly, then turned away, choosing not to return again. In the valley, winter came each year with the same indifferent beauty. Storms swept over ridges, erasing tracks as they always had. But in one cabin, tucked in a drawer, Mariah kept copies of every page. Sometimes, late at night, she opened them, reading by lamplight. The pencil marks wavered, faint but insistent, as if her brother were still calling from the snow. Visitors to the SR office stopped at the case, staring at the small objects behind glass. To them, it was a story of luck, of survival, of a rescue against odds. To the family, it was something simpler, proof that he had returned, that words written in cold could hold him to the world. The pencil lay still inside the display, split in two, edges charred, silent witness to days when life balanced on a line of graphite. The burned pencil waited behind glass, silent as the snow.